Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human existence.
It's great to be back. How's the modeling on systemic complexity coming along? Anything new this week?
It's been productive, but also deeply frustrating. It feels like the more data we get, the clearer the gap becomes between knowing what to do and actually, getting it done. You always seem so calm amidst all this.
Well, I try to focus less on the anxiety of it all and more on just observing the patterns. If you really engage with the problem itself, the intellectual work, that kind of becomes its own reward.
That intellectual engagement is exactly what we need today. We're getting into a paradox that I think sits at the heart of modern life.
Right.
We have this boundless access to information. I mean, unlimited resources, endless data, and yet societies all over the world seem to struggle so profoundly with these really basic, fundamental problems.
Things like traffic, education, infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. We just keep failing.
And that's the key. The failure isn't about a lack of knowledge. It's a systemic flaw in our whole approach. It's cultural, it's conceptual. We have the what, but we've lost the collective how.
So today, our mission is to diagnose that.
Right.
To look at the structural failures that stop us from acting together, but then also explore some really pioneering solutions that might help us get past them.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with that diagnosis. When we look at societies that seem to have it, more together, the easy assumption is that they're just more homogenous. But you're arguing it's something softer than that.
It's much softer. It's not about structure. It's about trust. It's about having shared cultural norms.
Okay.
Because those norms, they create these reliable, established templates for solving problems. If you know the system works, you trust it. You follow the rules because it's the logical thing to do.
But what happens when that trust just isn't there? And the very people who should be driving change, the educated class, the so-called locomotive, can't even connect with each other.
Well, that's when you get this metaphor that we found so useful in our work, the dry snow or dry sand analogy.
Explain that. It's a fascinating image.
In certain environments, snow becomes so fine, so pulverized, it's basically like dust, like dry sand. You can't make a snowball out of it. It won't stick together.
So you're saying the educated, influential part of society is like that?
In many ways, yes. They're individually brilliant, these perfect little crystals, but they're unable to cohere, to aggregate into a single powerful force that can actually push for meaningful change.
So this dry snow just sits there.
Yeah.
But at the same time, this same group has become an expert in a totally different skill set.
Yeah.
You call it type 2 problem solving. What is that?
It's a highly developed skill in finding ways around the rules. It's the art of stretching regulations until they're meaningless.
Or just giving words new meanings that are more convenient.
Exactly. Assigning a new subjective definition to a standard term just to sidestep what it was meant to do. It's a mastery of bureaucratic avoidance.
Which is brilliant for an individual trying to get something done quickly, I suppose.
For short-term individual gain, it's very effective. But for the system as a whole, it's a perfect recipe for failure. It completely undermines the integrity and predictability of the entire structure.
If everyone's playing the type 2 game, the type 1 game, the real collective effort just collapses.
It has to. It can't survive.
Okay, so if the snow won't stick, we need to find the moisture, right? The binder. And this brings us straight to what you identify as this massive barrier. A conceptual collapse, a lack of shared language.
This is the absolute core of the problem. We can agree on concrete things. A table is a table, a tree is a tree, but the abstract concept,
The ones that civilization is built on.
the very ones, justice, ethics, governance, these are treated by each person as if they're completely subjective, open to their own private interpretation.
And this is the personal dictionary idea. We all carry this book. The word on the left is the same, but the right-hand page.
The right-hand page is blank, and we each fill in our own definition, assuming everyone else has written the exact same thing.
But they haven't.
They haven't. So two people can have a very passionate discussion about, say, fairness, and they're using the same word but speaking two different languages. It's like a form of conceptual color blindness, Daltonism, but for ideas.
And you call this wider societal ailment, societal aphasia.
It is, Toplumsal aphasia. It's the systemic inability for people in a society to truly understand one another at a root level. And it's driven by a profound lack of curiosity about where our words even come from, what they're meant to mean.
And when you have that kind of conceptual vacuum, something is bound to rush in and fill it.
And what rushes in is often irrelevant, or even worse, actively damaging, usually in the form of these simplistic cultural proverbs.
Okay, give me an example. Let's take the concept of evidence.
A crucial one.
Yeah.
In a society that lacks a robust, shared understanding of what constitutes real evidence, that space gets filled by a maxim like, no smoke without fire.
Which sounds reasonable on the surface, but it's intellectually destructive.
It's incredibly destructive because it replaces the need for actual proof with just the appearance of suspicion. If I can create some synthetic smoke, if I can just manufacture an accusation, the cultural norm forces people to believe there must be a fire somewhere.
It's a blueprint for manipulation.
And we see the same thing with ethics. Take conflict of interest.
Yeah.
In some cultures, the literal translation just means a commercial dispute, like two companies bidding on the same contract. That's a healthy conflict.
But that's not the real meaning, the ethical meaning.
No. The crucial concept that's missing is the ethical violation. The situation where someone entrusted to protect an organization's interests, say a purchasing manager,
Right.
secretly uses that power for their own personal gain.
Diverting funds to their cousin's company or something?
Precisely. That specific corrosive ethical failure is the concept that's often missing. And in its absence, what fills the void?
Another proverb, I'm guessing.
The proverb is, he who handles honey licks his fingers.
Oh, that's chilling. It just completely normalizes it.
It frames corruption not as a moral or systemic failure, but as a natural, inevitable perk of the job. You can't even begin to fight it if your culture tells you it's just what people do.
Which is why projects like the Concepttion, trying to define and reintroduce these terms, are so vital. It's like trying to restock the public dictionary.
We have to standardize the right side of the page.
So let's pivot from concepts to complexity. The problems we face now, you call them the Bulamaç or the mash. How is that different from problems of the past?
Well, think about what Bulamaç is. It's a traditional food made from simple ingredients, molasses, flour, water, but it takes incredible strength to mix it.
Why?
Because the ingredients don't just mix, they chemically transform. They become a new, dense, hardened substance. You can't understand the final product just by looking at the raw parts anymore.
And that's like our societal problems. They're not simple and linear.
Not at all. The variables all interact and change each other, and the problem looks different depending on how you measure it. You might look at unemployment and think things are fine.
But then you look at income inadequacy.
And you realize 90% of the population is working for minimum wage and is in a state of crisis. The problem is a dense, sticky, complex mash. Our old tools just can't stir it.
Which forces us to look for new tools, maybe from nature.
Yeah.
Which brings us to swarm intelligence.
Exactly. Flocks of birds, schools of fish, they solve incredibly complex problems with no central leader.
Wow.
Through very simple local rules. A single fish in a school is only paying attention to its immediate neighbors. It's following maybe 3 basic rules. Move toward the center, match their speed, and don't collide.
And those simple local rules create this magnificent, coordinated, collective outcome.
Without anyone being in charge. That's the elegance we're trying to replicate in human systems. And that's really the origin story of things like the Good Judgment Project.
Which came about after some pretty catastrophic intelligence failures.
Massive failures. We had all these agencies, tens of thousands of analysts, and they all missed the same crucial predictions. The problem wasn't a lack of data. It was a failure to aggregate it properly.
So, good judgment was a test. How do we actually harvest collective foresight?
Yes, by asking quantifiable questions. What's the probability of X event happening by Y date? And from that, we got systems like Sound Predict.
Okay, so what's the secret sauce there? How does a platform like that get around all the biases we've been talking about?
The key is that it is a pure, ruthless meritocracy based on one thing only: prediction accuracy.
Doesn't care who you are.
It doesn't care about your name, your job title, your education, your nationality, nothing. All it tracks is how good your probabilistic predictions are over time.
So it filters out the noise of status and influence.
Completely. If you're consistently accurate, even if you're totally anonymous, the system promotes you. It moves you toward this core group of super forecasters. It finds the people who are objectively good at seeing the future and amplifies their signal.
That's the NEM, the moisture that makes the sand stick.
That is the conceptual moisture. It's anonymous, it's merit-based, and it's uncorrupted by politics.
It's an incredible model.
Yeah.
But it points to one last barrier we have to talk about: the learning crisis. Even with the internet, we seem to be struggling to learn these new concepts.
And this is deeply worrying. The root cause, ironically, often comes from well-intentioned educational reforms, things like the no-to-memorization projects.
Which were supposed to encourage critical thinking.
Supposed to. But what they inadvertently did was teach generations of people that they cannot learn something unless they are explicitly taught it in a structured way. It creates intellectual dependency.
It's like helping a chick break out of its shell.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
You think you're helping, but you're actually destroying its innate ability to struggle, to learn, to strengthen itself. By removing the necessary struggle of self-directed learning, we've created a kind of learned helplessness.
So, looking at this whole picture, the dry snow, the aphasia, the Bulamaç, it can feel a bit bleak. Where do you find hope in all this? Can these things be fixed?
Hope is always justified, but you have to change your time frame. If you need the solution to happen in your lifetime, you might be disappointed.
So where is the hope then?
The hope is in the simple fact that the current system is fundamentally unsustainable, and that reality is becoming painfully obvious to everyone, even those at the very top. When a system is unsustainable, change isn't just possible, it's inevitable.
That's a powerful way to reframe it. So given that, what's the one major recommendation you would give to someone listening who wants to be part of that inevitable change?
I'd say adopt the core principle from medicine. Do no harm, but with one small change. Remove the word first.
Just do no harm.
Do no harm to yourself, to others, to nature. If you make that your foundational principle, it simplifies almost every other moral question. It automatically leads to beneficial, sustainable actions. It's the ethical starting point for a non-harmful global citizen.
This has been just an incredible analysis of where we are and where we could go. For you listening, the key takeaways seem really clear. We have to fight this societal aphasia, build that shared conceptual language, the moisture for the sand. And we need to embrace the power of systems that value accuracy over status, like the super forecaster model.
And building on that, here's a final thought. We have these systems now, like SoundPredict, that prove we can reward objective, accurate foresight over personal influence. So what if we applied that principle more broadly? What if our public planning, our bureaucracies, were redesigned to give more weight to the calibrated, anonymous intelligence of super forecasters than to political posturing or lobbying? What would change if we decided that accurate foresight was the most valuable input for making a decision?
That's something to think about as you navigate the noise out there.